Next up, the state of gambling in the Commonwealth. It's been a stretch of somewhat troubling news. Revenue falling short of projections at the Plainridge Park Casino, the state's first. The never-ending battles between Steve Wynn and Marty Walsh. And now they're real concerned about the impact of fantasy sports on all this, not to mention the future of the Springfield Casino, which has been scaling back some of its plans. So much so, in fact, that the MGM International CEO and other top execs are flying in to meet with Springfield's mayor on Thursday. So where does it all stand now? Joining me is the man with all the answers, the chair of the Mass Gaming Commission, Steve Crosby. Steve, it's great to see you. Thanks so much.
Nothing to talk about.
Exactly. So I never let a guest do this, but I'm going to let you control the flow. You want to start Springfield, Everett, or Plainridge?
Let's go Everett.
Okay, let's do Everett. Marty Walsh and Steve Wynn, it's nonstop. There's a lawsuit from the city about whether the environmental permit was properly granted. There's a lawsuit by Wynn against unnamed defendants, allegedly for defamation. I've asked you this before. If the biggest and most important casino, you may not say it's the most important, the biggest and most important casino, the principals can't get along, how does it ever succeed?
Well, as we've discussed, the city really doesn't have the right to stop it. The city of Boston does not really have the right to stop it. They can make life very difficult, and there can be issues there, but in the final analysis, I think this is going to work out.
What if they win a lawsuit and say the environmental permit was improperly granted?
Well, A, the likelihood of that happening is very remote, and B, if it did, you'd redo the permit. You don't, if it were done improperly, you would then do it properly. So it's not going to kill the project.
Are you okay with Wynn's behavior? I mean, Wynn has been pretty heavy about how the mayor of the biggest city in the state has treated him.
Well, I don't think either one of them has been at their best on this one, but they're big boys. They can do their own business.
And you don't try to broker anything between them, do you? No. I don't even know if it's appropriate.
I mean, we would if we were asked, but it's not really our role.
Okay, you want to go Springfield? Or?
Let's do it, yeah.
Oh, Springfield. Okay, so the second scale back. Originally, a while ago, the MGM people scaled down, 25 stories down to 6. Allegedly the same number of rooms, but some people concerned about the skyline. And then a couple of days ago, 14% reduction in square footage. And while MGM said no impact on the consumer, the customer, retail, dining, bowling, movies, is this not an ominous sign? Is it possible there's going to be a third scale back and a fourth?
Well, we have the control over that, so there will only be further scale backs. There will only be this scale back if we approve it. And we've said we will be very deferential to whether Springfield approves it or not. So I really think there are two separate issues here. One was the manner in which this was handled. MGM will be the first to say now they mishandled this. They surprised Mayor Sarno. They did not give him the proper heads up.
Who's been one of the biggest supporters, I should say.
Big supporter. Yeah. And it's an extraordinarily interesting project, and they handled it badly. They're coming in, they've apologized, they're going to talk to him. Then you'll get to the merits. The merits are, does the 14% really change the nature of what Springfield and we approved? Maybe, maybe not.
Well, my understanding is one of the issues is part of the state law, right, is that there's got to be a minimum of a $500 million in capital investment on the part of the casino operator. They're teetering right on the edge as it is, no?
But that's one they can manage. I mean, that's, yes, that absolutely has to be done. That's firm. It has to be $500 million done for certain things, but that is one they can control.
But why is this not an ominous sign? We're going to talk about Plainville in a second. I would argue the second most important license you've granted so far, and
certainly
particularly important
biggest,
in a tough area that really needs the economic development, at least of some kind. One scale back, second scale back. I know you say that there's only so far they can go without your approval. Well, ultimately, maybe if you say no, they hit the road like the developer in New Bedford.
If that happened, that happened. That would be all right. That would, that's the nature of life. But they promised that they were going to spend $800+ million, and they promised that they were going to have a project with a bunch of elements: retail, skating rink, movie theater, housing. They promised $800 million in certain elements. They're going to spend $800 million plus, and they so far have not taken away any of the critical elements of this mixed-use project. So, because inflation drove their costs up, that doesn't necessarily mean that they're doing something inappropriate.
Well, you say it's inflation. It may be that they don't think the market is what it once was, that it may be glutted, no?
Well, they didn't promise us $900 million. They promised us $800 million, and they're going to spend $800 million.
Plainville, you know the story. I'm sure you have it in your dreams. From open late June. July revenues were what, 390 per day per machine. Is that not right?
Yeah.
Down to 330 the next month, down to 290 in September. Is that not cause for concern? Probably means if it holds somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 million less for the state, state will get a lot. But I'm less concerned about that than whether or not that's a warning shot about how much money there is for people to gamble away.
Jim, 1 month, 2 months. I mean, ask me in 2 years. You know,
I will ask you.
I'm
in
sure
2
you will.
years.
You'll ask me sooner than that. But you just can't. You know, you can't see a trend line in 1 or 2 months.
Okay, so fantasy.
By the way, $290 per machine a day is still way at the top of the amount of money that gets generated typically from a slot machine each day.
But it's brand new also, so and it's the only casino in the state, which
Yeah.
arguably causes it to be artificially
Yeah.
high. Fantasy sports. Now, you agreed to take a look at this, even though my understanding is the Gaming Commission has no formal jurisdiction, no
Correct.
formal power to do anything.
Correct.
So what are you going to do?
We are going to give the legislature and the governor our sense of some of the key issues. Should this be regulated? If it should be regulated, by whom? And more importantly, if it should be regulated, what should be regulated? What are the critical variables, if any? We have had a tremendous amount of experience in introducing a new gaming industry to Massachusetts. We know a lot about licensing. What are the criteria for licensing? How do you protect against problem gambling? Should there be criteria like that for this industry as well? So we're going to give them our advice. They'll make the decision, the legislature and the governor.
There's no doubt in your mind that it should be regulated. The question is what kind of regulation, no?
Well,
How can a
no,
multi-billion-dollar gambling thing be unregulated?
I tend to be somebody who leans away from regulation. The question is, are the same factors at play that make us regulate casinos in this business? Are there similarities? I don't know. We haven't thought about it yet, but it's worth thinking it through intellectually, not just assuming that we're going to go out and regulate a new industry.
If February or March is when you decide whether you're going to grant a commercial license in southeastern Massachusetts.
Correct.
Is that right? Okay, so the Mashpee Wampanoags appear to be ready to do something in Taunton, right? I know there's some legal issues, but that's the likelihood. Why do you even consider putting a second casino 17 miles away when, again, I assume there are limited amounts of money that people can gamble and lose?
They can coexist. I mean, they can coexist. They both would cannibalize one another. Neither one of them would do as well, but they
State
can
would get no money
coexist.
from the Mashpee Wampanoags,
Correct.
right? Zero.
Right.
If
Zero.
there was competition.
Correct. And it would not be as desirable. Nobody wants 4 casinos. Nobody wants 2 in southeastern Mass. But we owe it to the commercial folks to take a look at what they're telling us, see what their argument is, and as you said, there are hurdles still in the way of the tribe. It is not a done deal.
You say you owe it to whomever you just said you owe it to. Don't you owe it to the voters too? I know this isn't explicit, but when people voted to keep the casino law in place on the ballot, what they thought the law was a maximum of 3 casinos and a slots parlor. I mean, I assume you'd agree with that. That was the law.
Well, no, the law is what the law is, which contemplates the possibility there might be 4.
Yeah, well, except the thing that the legislature, well, if they're Native American things, there could be one in the vineyard, there could be one in the wherever. But isn't it at least violating the spirit? I assume if you stop the average person who knows anything about this, they'd say 3 casinos and a slots max.
Right.
And if you grant a license in southeastern Mass, there are 4 casinos and a slots parlor.
Maybe.
But possibly.
Yes,
But will
possibly.
that not weigh on your decision, how the
Sure,
voters?
that will weigh. No, I don't know about the way the voters. I hadn't thought about that criteria.
But why is that not relevant?
It might be. I just haven't really thought about it, Jim. But the problem is we don't know for sure what the tribe is going to do. We just don't know. You might go 10 years, 15 years with lawsuits. So is it right for southeastern Mass to sit there for 8, 10, 5, 15 years? Is that right? Maybe not.
Well, but beyond the rate, and the final question today, Steve Crosby, is do you step back and ask the question that I'm sure you started with, or legislators started with, how much money can we gamble in this state? More money gambled in the lottery per capita, you know, than any state by far.
Double.
3 casinos, maybe 4, and a slots parlor. Fantasy sports exploding. There is a limit, right? There's a point at which people just have no more money to spend on this stuff, no?
Yeah, but if, as you've heard, Massachusetts residents today gamble $10 billion a year in casinos. They just happen to be casinos in other states. If all we do is bring back that $10 billion, we don't add $1, we've got 10,000 jobs, we've got $250 million in tax revenue, and we haven't added $1 of gambling. So for good or ill, the market is there.
I hope you're right. Nice to see you, Steve
Pleasure.
Crosby.
All right,
Be well.
thanks.